The next part of the manual goes into, they call it mainsail rigging, but it's really the bowsy rigging. Let's take a look at a setup here. I have another boat right here. So what you see is for the backstay, you'll see there's a bowline knot tied here. And it goes up, and here's the bowsy itself. And then it goes up and goes through the rings. So basically we take the line through the bowsy here, up around the ring, back down, back the other way through the bowsy, up, and then we have to tie a big knot here so it doesn't pull out. But the way this works is tightening, pull this down, it gets tight, and you pull it up, and it gets loose. Now to do the bowsy, what I've done is I use crazy glue, even though it dries very, very fast, and I've glued my fingers together. What I've done here is I have put super glue on the end of the line, and then I've gone and cut it. So I super glued it, let it dry, and then I cut it there because it's just going to make it so much nicer on putting this through. So you now need to look at your bowsy very carefully, and you need to identify this side. Okay, and so you're going to start your bowsy. There you go. Up through there. Okay, so now you have the bowsy that way. You take the line through this little guy. Or in the case of the boom, you go through a hole on your boom. Okay, so now I have it like that. That line's going that way. Then I'm going to go back up through that one. And then I'm going to put a mark on it. I put a little mark on there. And so that's where my knot is going to end up. So then I do a triple figure eight. Once around, twice around, 3 times around. I put it through that hole, and then I put my mark on there where I want my knot to end up. And then you see where the mark is. So I did a triple figure eight knot. Then that is not going to come out. Then I'll put a little super glue here, a little bit on the knot, and I will trim that off there. After you figured out the bowsy, you go next to the mast deck sliding plate. And that is going to be right up here. And generally what most people do is they air towards these back holes. And I'm going to set it on number 2 from the back. So this is pretty easy. Loosen it up. This is where your mast goes through the deck. There you go. You got your mast deck plate set. The next step is setting the main sheet guide. So this is where the main sheet goes through the boom. That's this little guy right here. So you can see that I've got the main sheet guide, 64 millimeters. You move that just by moving this rubber stopper. So it's about 64. You'll end up moving this just a little bit. And I don't suggest gluing that for a while. I definitely suggest you lube this up so even in the lightest of wind, this swivels evenly to both sides. We then go to the next page and we actually fit the mainsail onto the mast we put the mast on the mast stub. We put the boom onto that. We have the mast, and we have the boom. The mast stub, you have to identify the beveled edge, and then you're also going to have your mast crane neck. So we will stick those on. These are the little pieces of line that I am going to tie through the mainsail there and around the mast. So I'm going to take my lines. You could use the metal clips, doesn't really make that big a difference. And take a little, 70 millimeter little piece of line and put it around the mast. I'm looking for about 2 millimeters, maybe 1 millimeter, but not too tight on these. It doesn't seem to make a big difference to have it too loose. Definitely seems to make a big difference. So I'm going to use a square knot, or what people call a reef knot. And that is left over right. Kind of like you're tying your shoe. And then right over left. And kind of the cool thing about this knot is that you can play with the tension a little here, and I'll show you how. Let me get the knot built here. I just built that reef knot right there, and I can pull on those tails and it'll cinch that thing right down against the mast. So I pulled it tight, and the sail is right next to the mast. Now if I take a screwdriver here or something, I'll use an Allen wrench. I can loosen this up by putting that inside there like that and then pulling out on the knot. It'll loosen it up, and it's gonna put a couple millimeters in there. You can see a pretty big gap in there. If I go back and tension these again, I can play with that knot back and forth until I get it just a millimeter, maybe a little bit of millimeter between the sail. And I'm going to leave that like that, and I'll go back and super glue that. So now I'm going to tie each one of these rings on the mast. I have tied all 6 eyelets with reef knots all the way up for each one. I tend to tie that one the loosest, so that one will be, definitely a couple millimeters between the sail. And then as I go down the sail, I'm trying to make this like 1 millimeter between the mast and the sail. That way it doesn't stick on the mast as you do jibes and go downwind and things like that. You won't have the sail stick on the mast. You're going to stick the mast tube in. The beveled edge is facing down. That's going to slide right in there. I have a lot of Vaseline on this. There's going to be the bearings of your boom here are going to corrode, especially if you're sailing in salt water. So especially going to take your Corrosion X, and you are going to make sure you put an absolute ton of it on here. Okay. Then you're going to take your boom and slide it up from the bottom. There you go. Now the next step is going to be to tie this to the top of the mast. So what we have to do here is we need to grab the mast crane, which is this guy, and we put a bunch of Vaseline all over the thing. Some people will glue this. I do not recommend it. So that'll go down inside there, and then we're going to tie there to there again with just a square knot. Pretty happy with that. I tie the head a little bit looser away from the mast, and then I tie the top of the mainsail to the top of the metal ring. It's a tiny bit above that right now because I am going to stretch that just a little. When you sail, it's going to stretch just a little, probably depending on how you do. From the handbook, you're going to see you're doing the Cunningham next. There's the Bosey 300 millimeter. I use the white line for the Cunningham. You could use a different knot for this, but we're doing a tiny, tiny bowline right around this little eyelet right here. What you have to do here is you have to build the bowline. You make a big loop and hold it like that. Okay? And you hold that large loop and you build the knot. You go up out of the hole. It's the old rabbit story. Up out of the hole, down and around the tree here. So you want that to go under there. And then this is going to go right back the same hole. So now you have the bowline knot built right there. You can see it. What you have to do is you have to grab this one with your tweezers and shrink the big loop, this part of the loop down. So you grab here and you're pulling it out. And you can see that that part of the loop is getting smaller, and then you're pulling the tail out. So now I'm going to grab this guy again and I'm going to pull on it until it's tight. See how that big loop around here has shrunk down to almost nothing. Then you pull the tail and you really cinch it and you pull this all different directions. It'll tighten right down onto that thing. Then what you do is you come up through the sail. Then you're going back down through the same pad eye, the same eye that you tied the bowline around. Now I've got it tied up through the sail down, then it comes back and we start the Bosey. The line is going to end up right over that little spot. So you go going up through. So there, I got it through there. Through there. Okay, so essentially this is not a big adjustment, but I'm gonna get it where I want it. I'm gonna put, once I get it kind of where I want it, I'm gonna put a little black mark on there. The black mark's gonna make it, that's where I want my finishing knot. I'm trying to cinch this knot down so it's right where the black mark is. And I didn't nail it, but that should be fine. So I have a big knot there, and that's not going to come out of there. Pulling it that way to tighten it. And that looks pretty good. And still get to my compression strut there.